In 2024, the world faces a staggering $2.4 trillion annual climate finance gap, sparking urgent debates about whether a new, climate Marshall Plan, is the only viable path to avert a total global ecological catastrophe. Geographically, the crisis is unevenly distributed, with small island developing states and sub-Saharan nations facing rising sea levels and extreme heat, while the global north remains the primary historical source of cumulative carbon emissions. Historically, the colonial extraction era established a dependency cycle that persists today, as resource-rich nations in the Global South struggle to fund green transitions while burdened by debt inherited from centuries of imperial economic structures. In the mid-20th century, the devastating aftermath of World War II left Europe in ruin, with millions displaced and infrastructure destroyed, necessitating the massive, unprecedented capital injection that would eventually define the original Marshall Plan. Political transformation arrived in the post-war era as colonies sought independence, yet these new nations often lacked the industrial capital required for self-sufficiency, leaving them vulnerable to the shifting tides of Cold War geopolitical maneuvering. Our map shows the divide between the G7 donor nations in the north and the vulnerable economies across the Global South, highlighting the stark disparity in financial capacity and climate-related risk exposure across the world. During the 19th century, the rapid industrialization of Western powers relied on fossil fuels, creating a carbon-intensive global economy that now leaves the developing world playing catch-up under increasingly strict international environmental regulations. By the mid-20th century, the global reliance on oil and coal became the bedrock of modern urban growth, locking nations into infrastructure patterns that are now proving difficult and expensive to decarbonize as temperatures rise. In 1948, the United States enacted the European Recovery Program, providing $13.3 billion to 16 nations, proving that coordinated, massive state-backed investment could successfully stabilize and rebuild shattered economies within a single decade. During the late 20th century, the oil era cemented the dominance of Bretton Woods institutions like the IMF and World Bank, which now find themselves at the center of modern debates regarding climate-resilient development finance. Despite warnings from scientists throughout the 1990s regarding the long-term risks of atmospheric carbon accumulation, international policy remained focused on growth, largely ignoring the looming seismic shifts in global weather patterns and climate stability. Recent years have seen a deepening crisis, with the 2022 sovereign debt struggles in nations like Sri Lanka and Pakistan illustrating how climate-induced disasters can trigger economic collapse, making repayment of existing loans nearly impossible. Comparing the 1948 Marshall Plan to today, we see a shift from a bipolar Cold War world to a multipolar reality, where the lack of a unified global governance structure complicates the delivery of massive climate aid. For ordinary citizens in the Global South, the lack of climate finance translates into lost homes, destroyed agriculture, and forced migration, as the human cost of inaction mounts in the face of increasingly frequent extreme weather events. At COP28 in 2023, the operationalization of the Loss and Damage Fund marked a significant, albeit small, step forward, providing a fraction of the necessary resources to assist nations facing the immediate impacts of climate change. The scientific reality remains clear. Decarbonizing the global economy requires a transition from high-carbon energy sources to renewables, a process that demands trillions in upfront capital that many developing nations simply cannot afford to borrow. Under the Bridgetown initiative, leaders like Barbados Prime Minister Mia Mottley are actively lobbying for a fundamental reform of the global financial architecture to unlock liquidity and suspend debt for nations hit by climate disasters. The legacy of the original Marshall Plan survives today as a powerful symbol of international cooperation, though modern museums and policy archives emphasize that it was a specific response to unique Cold War security threats. A lesser-known fact is that the original Marshall Plan cost roughly 5% of U.S. GDP at the time, a scale of investment that, if applied today, would equate to hundreds of billions in annual climate grants. Ultimately, geography dictates our vulnerability, but policy determines our resilience, and the choice to either reform or maintain the current financial order will define the survival of the most exposed nations in the coming century. Financial experts note that private sector mobilization, while essential, cannot replace the role of sovereign grants in funding public infrastructure projects that lack the immediate profit margins required by traditional commercial investment banks. Ultimately, the success of any future climate finance framework depends on balancing the urgent needs of the Global South with the complex economic constraints of donor nations, ensuring that global development remains both sustainable and equitable.